Good morning. Tuesday. Okay, so I've got an update for you. Last Friday, I was speaking to you about essentially how Christians have a history of service when it comes to plagues. Basically, when it comes to stepping up and taking care of our fellow human beings, we've got a good track record of doing so. So I gave you a rather longish introduction, and then ended with an appeal for Anson Place, which is really having a hard time taking care of their residents because so many residents and staff are sick. So I'd put out that call. Um, Now, as luck would have it, when I got home, there was a message waiting for me from the hospital here in town. So I won't go into the details what it was about, but essentially they were asking me for something. And after giving that great speech about how Christians always step up in times of crisis, I had zero ability to say no. I guess like nobody would have known, right? But yeah, there's no way that I could have turned down the request. So now I've got a new job. But anyway, um, but what that actually reveals to me, you folks may not realize this, but it takes a particular kind of crazy to be a minister. And Paul gives warnings. He says, don't aspire to be a teacher of the word. That's, you just don't want to do that. Um, but it takes a particular kind of crazy because essentially I speak to myself all the time. Now, some sermons I've had folks come up after a sermon and say, you know, were you thinking about me when you wrote that? Like that was just exactly, you told me what I needed to hear. But essentially, most sermons are actually me speaking to myself. Whatever lesson it is that I'm trying to put across, whatever it is that I've discovered within the Word that week, primarily I preach to myself first, and then to other folks. Which means, first of all, if you're feeling any kind of conviction out of the message, that's the Spirit, that's not me. So that's God speaking to you. But what that also means is that I can't recommend anything to anybody that I don't do myself. And that's a very important thing because that was a criticism that Jesus had of the teachers of the law in his time. And he said to the not to the Pharisees but to his disciples and to the crowds. He said that the scribes and the Pharisees they sit on Moses' seat. So therefore do what they say. And he basically said they're in that line, that tradition of lawgivers and teachers as Moses. So you ought to listen to them. But he said, listen to them and do what they say, but don't do what they do because they don't practice what they preach. They tie up heavy burdens that are hard to bear. They lay them on the shoulders of others, but they themselves are unwilling to lift a finger to help. And that's quite a harsh condemnation. Um, it really kind of strikes home, and this is one of those passages that, as a preacher, like honestly, it strikes fear, right? Because that's the last thing that we want to be. People that are putting together some kind of demands for other people that we're going to place a burden on other people and say, this is what you're expected to do. Although I'm not necessarily going to do it myself. He goes on to say they'd love to have those places of honor at banquets. They want the best seats in the synagogues. They like to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces. And then he concludes by saying, all who exalt themselves will be humbled, but all who humble themselves will be exalted. And essentially, he's talking about hypocrisy here. And this is something that applies not just to people that are in a position of teaching or leading, but actually to all of us, because we're all in positions of teaching and leading, depending on the circumstances within our household, within classrooms, within Bible study groups, just wherever we happen to be, we get put in those positions. Are we ever hypocritical when we're in those roles? And that's a very serious question that we need to ask ourselves. Do we expect more of other people than of ourselves? So do we place burdens on others that we're not willing to bear. And I think that this is really at the root of Jesus' declaration that we're to love others in the way that we love ourselves. Because often we tend to have a little bit different standards for other people and for ourselves. For the most part, I think we have more grace for ourselves, so that when somebody else does something wrong, it's greatly offensive to me. But if I were to do the same thing, well, I have my reasons. I was having a bad day, and whatever my excuse is. Um, so, do we actually love others in the way that we love ourselves? Do we extend to them the same grace, the same forgiveness, the same understanding that we would give to ourselves in various situations? And all of this, to kind of wrap it up, is to, I guess, give the message that it's not what we say that should be important, but what we do, and that our entire lives should be a sermon. Our entire lives should be a message, but a message of hope, of love, and so that people can, instead of, as Jesus said with the Pharisees, do as they say, but don't do what they do, that perhaps we should aspire to live the opposite, that we would have people to do whatever it is that we do, regardless of what it is that we may say. And Paul really picks up on this too when he says in his letter to the Corinthians, he said, "Copy me as I seek to copy Christ." And I think that's such a wonderful, very simple thing, that if we can grasp that, and if we can start living that, that we will be the kind of Christians that this world desperately, desperately needs. No hypocrisy, no judgment, just I'm doing my best to live as Christ did. Try and do as I do. And I'll leave you with that this morning.